Hello, Uncle Ronnie.
Hello. My name's Ronnie Mann. I was born on May the 20th of 1942 on the Vringberg place. I don't remember anything, of course, about that spot. But I can remember. Actually, I can remember a little more about that place, but it was like several years later. But at that time, obviously, I don't remember anything about it. So
What's the? Tell me the place that you first had memories of when you're a kid.
well, my first memories was over on the Rogers place. I don't remember a lot, but I can remember 2 or 3 specific things that happened there. I used to like to roam. By the time I was about 4 years old, I loved to take off. And I always took the dog with me, and Mom, she always kind of knew where I was at because the dog was always, she could see the dog. But I remember one time going south out around the barn, and I crossed the hollow, and there was a patch of timber along the side there, just above the creek. And I remember going up through that looking for Dad, because Dad was up on the top of the hill with a team of horses and a wagon. He was picking corn up there. And I remember, I believe Jerry was with me, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But anyhow, we went up on top of the hill and found Dad, and he was had a whole full wagon load of corn, and he was ready to come back down through the timber to the barn and to the corn crib to unload the corn. So he put Jerry and I on top of that load of corn. I remember that, and we rode back down through. I don't remember a lot more about that after we got back down to the corn crib or anything, but I do remember that part. And then another time, but the only time that I can really recall very good, was the day that the sailor was walking up the lane, and it was my brother Lorne coming home from the Navy. And that I remember. Probably because it was so different to me to see somebody like that coming towards me, you know, and I remember that real well. But that's pretty well it as far as that particular place.
At the Rogers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier tonight about your most of your memories are at the 80, because you of all the kids spent the most years there than anybody.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, when we and the thing with kind of in perspective, we couldn't have stayed at the Rogers place very long, because I was only about between 4 and 5 when we moved back to the 80 over west of Pisgah. And that's when my memories are the fondest, because I, of course, was old enough to recall about everything that happened there, you know. And I remember we didn't have any electricity and no water in the house when we first got there. And I remember Dad, I don't remember who he hired particularly, but they come and they dug water line up into the house, and that was the same time that we had electricity put in the house. And I don't really recall exactly who did all that work, but anyhow, we had a sink in the southwest corner of the kitchen, and there was a light switch, and every time you wanted a glass of water, you just flip the switch on and the pump started running down at the well, and you could get a glass of water. Come out kind of jerky, so you kind of had to hang on to the glass pretty good. But anyhow, you could get a good drink of water. It was some of the best water I ever tasted, was right there. And then I remember, oh, there's so many things that I remember about that place. I remember we had 3 big cottonwood trees that sat around the house, one on the southwest corner of the house and the other were kind of out on the west side of the house. And I can remember going through a lot of rainstorms when the wind was blowing hard. Those big old cottonwood trees would really get to roaring when the wind was blowing hard, you know. And I recall that real well. And I do also, we had a cellar that sat out north and a little bit east of the house. And every time it would get really bad, most of the times, Dad would say, well, let's get going. And we'd go out and we'd open the cellar doors and go down in there and set it out till that storm was over with, you know. And, oh, there was a lot of things. A lot of it I remember going outside after the rain and running in the mud, you know. And a couple of times I remember cutting my foot real bad on old broken glass or something. And I'd be bleeding pretty good. And then as there was a lot of memories there, because as I kept growing up, I can remember one time Dad wanted me to go up on top of the hill to cut some. He sharpened up the corn knife. I remember Manny had that thing razor sharp. And he said, I want you to go up here, up on the top of where the road went up, and cut these sunflowers. Well, I didn't really want to do it very bad. So I went up there, and I got to wheeling pretty hard coming down through them base of those sunflowers, and I sliced right into my big toe, just behind the base of my big toe. And the blood, it ran like I ran all the way back down in the dust. You know, I need to back up a little and kind of tell you that Jerry and I were about 7 and 8 years behind all the rest of the family. And we were spoiled. I mean, I know that for a fact, you know. And anyway, I didn't want to cut them weeds, so I got up there and I was mad, and I was wheeling that sharp corn knife pretty wicked, and I cut right through the base of one of them sunflowers, and it sunk right into the base of below my right toe. And of course, like I said, the blood was running, and it was a lot of dust on the road, and every time my right foot would hit that dust, it left a ring of blood right around the edge of my footprint. So I was bleeding pretty profusely. Well, I got down to the house, and I remember Mom, she says, oh, Dad, Dean, she says, this kid's going to bleed to death. Well, my dad was not the kind to he cared, but he didn't get overwhelmed with us throwing a fit. He'd already had 6 other kids before we come along, you know, so he kind of was getting an idea how to do it. And anyhow, he says, well, just wrap some old towel or something around it. And Mom did. She kind of washed it a little bit with some cold water and then wrapped around, and it seemed to kind of stop it. But I don't really believe I ever went back to the doctor with that. I think Mom just took the bandage back off a couple of times and put a little bit of salve or something on it and wrapped it back up, you know. But that was that particular experience. And then around on the east side of the house, there was a slope that come down from the top of the hill, and we used to sleigh ride on that. We'd get in there, and I remember one time, it was icy is what it was, and Jerry and I come down around there, and about the first time we came down, we missed the corner, and we went end over end. I remember that. That was a fun experience, but there's a lot of things about that farm. That was where I had an opportunity to really go for hikes. I mean, I love to do that. I started out mighty early at wanting to do that sort of thing, and I loved it. And I remember Dad he got me a BB gun to begin with, but then wasn't too long until he knew I wanted to hunt bad enough, and he told Mom, he says, I'll get him a single shot 22. He'll be all right. He can use short ammunition in it, and it won't be, be careful. And he did show me how to use the gun and everything. But I used to take lots of hikes. I mean, I walked as far north as up to where the Boy Scout ranch is now. So which was a long ways north. And so I did a lot of hiking and that sort of thing. And I remember we always had farm dogs, and we had that Aussie dog that my sister Shirley had mentioned earlier, and we had him there. And the thing I didn't like about that dog was every time Mom would make Jerry and I a peanut butter sandwich, when we walked outside, that dog would take it every time, because we weren't too big then, about 4 or 5 maybe at that point. And he would take that sandwich away from us every time. But I remember we always had dogs around, and I can remember one time we had a female called Peggy, and she was capable of having pups. We had 2 or 3 litters from her. But I remember one time I got a pup, and we had to get rid of all of them. Dad said, they got to be given away. So I kept one black and white male, and I called him Duke. And I remember when he was just a little pup, Peggy was in the wintertime, and she had come back into season. And in those days, nobody tied up a dog. Everybody had dogs, but they run the whole countryside if they felt like it. Well, one night, I remember it was a moonlight night, and we had some snow about the night before that. And it was about 2 or 3 inches deep or so. And I can remember laying up in bed, and I could hear this dog fight going on. And it was really, really going, I could hear it all night long. Well, the first thing I did after I got dressed the next morning was I ran to the top of the hill, because the Duke dog never went up there. He was just a pup, and he was scared. He stayed down to the house. But we had a little fox terrier called Spot then. And he had went up there, and he got in the middle of that whole waylay, because he was a pretty feisty for a little dog. And he apparently I didn't know where he was at. Didn't find him for quite a while. But I remember looking clear down to the end of that lane before it makes a turn and goes back to the east to the road. And there laid our neighbor's Chinese Chow, big red dog. And I'll never forget that, because they had been fighting all the way from the top of the hill for at least 100 yards over to that other, where the road made the bend. And there laid that Chow, and it was just blood and dog tracks all over, in that snow. And that went on all night long. But that was another one of those experiences that really stuck in my mind for being there. And then I used to, like Shirley said, I would hop on the tractor when I got to be about 7 or 8, and I would drive that thing. Jerry and I both learned how to drive that, and we would go over and get the mail with it too, Another thing that happened while I lived there, that the good Lord was watching over me, was at one time the church was picking up corn out at where Warden Esther Shear lived, east of town, and they had wagons, but they didn't have no tractors to pull them with. So Dad said, well, why don't you, he gave me permission to take the tractor and go out there. So I went out there and we picked up corn, I don't know, probably till about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And then we, nobody was slaving real hard at it, but we still got quite a lot of corn picked up. Anyway, I come back home, brought the tractor back home. Well, I had Roger Armstrong, a friend of mine that went to school with. He was with me, and I remember he was riding on the back, and when I started to come down to the north, down the long grade of the hill, I got this idea I was going to kick it out of gear. So I did, and we went flying down the road, and it had rained. It had rained maybe a night or, well, probably more than one night, but it rained anyway. And we were coming along there, and I was goofing off talking to Roger, and pretty soon his eyes got to be about the size of golf balls, and he bailed off. Well, then I was talking to him, wasn't paying any attention. When I turned around, there was a washout that had come way out in the edge of the road, and by the time that I knew what was going to happen, it was too late, and I caught the right hind wheel in that washout, and it flipped me around at right angles and sent me clear to the bottom of the creek, which was quite a ways down. And I remember, just like it happened yesterday, I can remember seeing the exhaust pipe and the breather pipe right underneath of me, and I was in the process of flying clear off of that tractor, and I lit somewhere down towards the bottom of the creek, not completely at the bottom, but up the hill a little bit, and I must have landed sideways. And then I'm almost for sure that the tractor went completely end over end, and when it came down, the front wheels missed me in front of me down the hill, but the back left hind tire of that tractor rolled over my back. And the reason I know that it happened was I was wearing a denim jacket, and I never saw it myself, but Mom said the tractor lug prints of that tractor wheel was on my back as it rolled over. And I remember I was bleeding like a stuck hog out of my nose because I had smashed my nose pretty good. And I was still conscious at that point, and I started to kind of crawl partway back up the ditch bank, and I was hurting pretty good, but there was nothing broken, thanks God for that. But I looked up at the top of the road, and Roger was there with his bawling because he thought I'd had it, and I says, go get help. Well, apparently he started back up the road where we'd come from, and it wasn't but just a little bit later that a lady by the name of Martindale, Mrs. Martindale, she hollered down, and about that time I must have been kind of coming to, because I had passed out for just a little bit. I know I did. And I was coming to, and she says, well, can you make it up here? And she wasn't really an elderly lady, but there was no way really that she could come down that bank. So yeah, I started crawling, and I managed to, I was in good shape before all that happened. That was the thing that was maybe to my advantage. But I got up there, and she loaded me up, and she took me all the way home. And I remember Jerry bawling like mad because he thought I was going to die. And Mom cleaned me up, and of course Dad's always the kind that, he was always the calming factor. I mean, he knew a lot of common sense, and he just kind of said, no, just take it easy, Liz. And so they took me back into the doctor, Dr. Ferguson, and he checked me over, and he says, well, I can't find anything particularly that I can detect, but he says, I hear a little teeny bit of gurgling in his lungs, He says, I think you better just take him on down to the Mercy Hospital in Council Bluffs. So that's where we went, and I remember my stay down there is kind of weird. They give me a lot of these real good shots. I remember they made me feel really fantastic, you know, but they made you kind of hallucinate, you know, about stuff. And they brought some young guy into my room to be in the other bed, and he was a juvenile delinquent. I'm pretty sure of it. First time I ever met one. But a little bit, I think about the next day, a patrolman come in and talked to him, because he was obviously, he's older than I was, but he was obviously not of age. And they got him to bawling and carrying on, but he was tough acting kid. Well, anyway, that first night that I was laying in bed there, I remember I says, he's got a knife, he's got a knife. Well, it was kind of strange because, you know, he didn't have no knife. I enjoyed them shots so well, you know. But they finally took me out of there and took me into another room, and then I pretty well calmed down from that situation. And it wasn't only about I was only in there maybe 4 days, and I was no broken bones, so they discharged me, and I got back home, and that pretty well wraps up that little session. And
other than, what did Grandpa say about the tractor?
Well, he, you know, I think normally he would have probably been mad, but I think he was scared too, that I'd really gotten hurt bad. And I think he didn't say anything else about it. He got some help, obviously, from somebody that pulled it backwards up out of there, got it out. And except for the broken muffler and the broken breather stack, you know, the tractor was not hurt really at all. It wasn't, the steering wheel wasn't bent or anything, you know. So he never said too much about that really. So, well, I remember we used to go, like Shirley said, that we went into town, and we had an old, the first car that I can remember Dad having was a 51 Ford when we was living there. And I remember we went in town, and of course Mom, she'd always went, because she was the one that really always bought the groceries, picked them up and everything. And I can remember one time I come mighty close to getting, this was another time the Lord was watching over me, I come mighty close to getting killed right on the main street of Pisgah, because Elmer's Cafe was down on the corner, which is called the old Home Feller Up Cafe now. But anyhow, I bailed off of that curb and started over to Miller's store, and man, there was a set of headlights screeching right down on me. And he didn't hit me, but he rolled up within about a foot of my leg with that bumper, and that got my heart going pretty good. But anyhow, the things I remember about going into town was that Mom, she would always go outside. Dad loved to play cards. I mean, he would get into a game of cards at the pool hall every time he went in there, because he loved to do it. And the thing I kind of remember about a lot of that was old Marty Hinkle, who had a big family himself. Him and Dad always wanted to be partners with each other, because they both of them counted all the trump cards, and they knew exactly who was holding what, you know. And so they did a good job. And Mom, of course, would set out with the other ladies for maybe 2 or 3 hours. They would get into one car, 4 or 5 of them, and visit, and you know. And anyway, while he was in there, he would win he'd almost always win, and they won enough money. I remember witnessing this for a fact. He'd win enough money that he could go down, because we went down to Van Eaton store. That's where we got our groceries. And I remember Dad and Mom, Dad would bring in cream, a cream can pretty well full of cream, and then Mom would have quite a few eggs, you know, in a carton, and bring them in, and then they'd barter, of course, back then, trade them for groceries. Well, between those eggs and cream, and what little money Dad would always make enough money to pay for those groceries, as I seen him do it. And because I would always, quite often, I would stop in there and watch him play cards, stand behind him, you know, and so I know that he won, you know, back then, if you won $2 or $3, you had quite a lot of money, you know. Well, he could pay for all them groceries and everything besides the bartering with the trading of the eggs and the cream. Well, that's one thing I remember. And then we used to have, had a movie theater there in Pisgah when I was a kid. And it was going, you know, before my time too, a little while, but I remember it because Dad, he always kind of wanted to, seemed especially like with Jerry and I, he was always trying to do something for us, with us. And I don't think he could afford to do much with the other 6 kids because he was too busy trying to make a living, you know. But he would take us back into town and we get to watch some old Alan Ladd movie or something, you know. And I remember doing that quite often. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I remember something else that was a little on the devilish side. So we had and I won't mention his name, but we had a feller that walked the streets in Pisgah, and he actually lived west of us about 1.5 miles on another road out on the 80, but he would always walk down across our pasture to go into town. Well, anyway, he'd be in town on Saturday nights too. He'd get in there. I think part of the time he could catch a ride in. He didn't always have to walk, but he was in town, and a bunch of us, I won't mention names because I don't think I should, but anyhow, we went and got some balloons, and we filled them full of water balloons. Well, there used to be an old building there on the west side of the street. It was the John Deere building. It's not there now. They tore it clear out of there. But we used to go back on the back side, and the roof come down fairly close to the ground, because a big, long, sloping gable roof on that building. And we could crawl up on there and then go all the way up to the gable and out, and the east end of it set right out over the sidewalk that come down along the street. Well, we'd wait for this old fella to come down, and we bombarded him with our water balloons. I'm dropping them on him, and you know, it probably isn't funny, but yet it is kind of funny. And we didn't do that all the time, but that was one particular instant that we did do that, you know. But yeah, we had some good memories there, and then eventually, you know, we got to the point where it was kind of tough going for Dad and Mom. It really was, and that was when Dad decided that he would sell the place. And of course then we moved to Woodbine, and I'll go into more detail on that in a little bit probably. So, well, I remember when we come to the 80, one of the things that happened was right around where those cottonwood trees stood on the west side, we couldn't actually get all the way around. We could come down the hill on the east side of the hill, and then we had to park on the southwest side of the house. That's where we parked, because there wasn't any way to get around those trees. Well, I do remember I don't remember who it was, but Dad got somebody. It could have been the maintainer man. And I think he just come down there and decided to, as a favor, he started moving dirt around the outside edge of those cottonwood trees, and he made us a road curve over, and then he plowed it all the way out to where the road started coming down the hill from the top, you know. So I remember that we had a good road. It was always mud, it was always dirt and mud, but it was graded nice, you know. And I remember that, and that was one of the things that got done. And then I remember the way the farm laid out. Dad and brother Dwayne, built the barn that was there. It was just a kind of a little lean-to roof type thing, you know, and it leaned towards the south because the higher part of the roof was along the north side and sloped back to the south. Well, I remember that, and then we had 3 corn cribs on that place. One of them sat on the north side of the barn, and then the other one was on the west side of the fence. There was a fence that came down along from the north there. And there's one crib that sat on the west side, and then there was another crib in the south end of our barnyard. So we had 3 corn cribs there. And I can remember Dad used to scoop, I remember him especially scooping into that west crib. He'd bring the wagons. There was enough room between the crib and the fence that he could drive right along there, and then he could scoop the corn up in between the uprights. There's boards all the way up to a certain height, and then Dad could scoop over the top of them to fill the crib up with ear corn. And I remember him doing that. And I remember also Jerry and I, we were kind of reluctant about it, but we went out. I remember one time we went out and actually hoed the cornfield. The cornfield it wasn't real big, but I think we hoed till we had about at least half of it, and then a rain come, and then I don't remember ever going back out there, but we did hoe in there for a while. And I remember there was a lane that went from where that west corn crib was, that went up the hill to the top of the hill, and then there was a hog fence, a hog pen you would call it, or a hog yard, and Dad had a couple of hog houses up in there. And I remember one particular time, Jerry and I, we were always a little bit leery of hogs. We had some kind of scary experiences with hogs. And that brings me up, as long as I'm talking about hogs, that brings me another experience that I had with hogs that really got me going. Was that one time I went over to our neighbors who live southwest of us, over the hill. Cresses lived there, the family by the name of Cress. And they kind of let their hogs run kind of wild, you know, anywhere and everywhere. And I remember I was going to take a shortcut. Rather than going to the top of the hill and down the lane, I was going to cut across and come through over our fence and then go across their hog pasture and then down to where the house was. Well, I was barefooted at that time. Wasn't wearing shoes. And I remember running down that hill, and there was like a mulberry tree there with roots that had kind of growed out, where the roots had caught dirt and built a ledge there. And down underneath was a nice cool, where the water tended to run. It was a little bit muddy and nice and cool. Well, this old sow thought that was a fantastic place to have her farrow her pigs. So I was running down this hill, and I wasn't thinking about hogs at all. And I jumped down off of that little ledge, and I landed right in her belly. And she exploded on me, and she come up, and just barking. And I mean, I was so scared, I'll tell you what. I ran down a little ways down the hill from her, and there was a bunch of tall hemp weeds and old sunflowers and stuff. And I bailed into them, and then I just froze, because I thought if she didn't see me moving, she'd stand up there and bark and not, you know, turn around and take care of her pigs, you know. Well, she did. She kind of laid back down and started nursing them. But let me tell you what, my heart just about come to a stop on that deal. And another time it happened was that we had some pigs in that old lean-to hog house above the barn, corn crib. They're in the hog on our property. And Dad says, "Go up there and take this basket." He told Jerry and I. Jerry was with me. And go up there and pick those pigs up and bring them back down to the house, because for some reason or other, this old sow was eating them pigs. She was killing them, and you know, sometimes they do that. I don't know why, but this one was. And so we went up there, and we managed to get about 3 of them pigs in that basket. They didn't make any noise. Then we grabbed one that squealed, and man, I tell you what, them sows are already wild as banshees anyway. And they come flying out of there, and Jerry and I went down the hill on a dead run. And I got over the fence. I crawled over the fence. But I remember Jerry, I never forget it, because he come down the hill and he was scared, and he literally cleared that whole fence. It had a woven wire with about 2 strands of barbed wire on the top side of it. And he wasn't very big, but he leaped completely over that whole thing. You know, he was scared. That was another experience that I remember. That was, you can't forget them kind of deals. They're just there, you know. And oh, and I remember another time too, about this had nothing to do with hogs. But we had this old washout ditch that come down through our place. And at that time, it was just a rain washout. You know, there was no running water in it, only whenever it rained, you know. But it washed a heck of a gutter down, and then starting just a little ways up west of our barnyard, a little ways up, the water had come down, and then it washed out. It had dropped. It made a little waterfalls, what it did, and it washed it all out. And then from then on down the ditch, it dug it. It took it down fairly deep. It was rugged, you know. And I'll never forget, remember one time that little spot dog, that little terrier, was barking his head off, and he was forever finding bull snakes. And I remember we went down there, and I know that I witnessed the biggest bull snake I'll ever see, because that bull snake was 7 foot long if it was an inch, and it was about probably 3 or 3.5 inches big around in the middle. And I'll never forget that, because that little terrier, it was so big that little terrier couldn't shake it. I mean, he couldn't flip it. He got a hold of it, but he couldn't flip it because it was too much tail hanging out, you know. It was a long, big snake. And I'll remember that one pretty good, because it was a bull snake, and it was a big one. And I remember, there were several times I seen snakes. I remember one time in the pasture south of that ditch, up along the hillside, I ran into a nest of those, what they used to call spreading adders. And I remember I got up there, and I could hear them, because they sort of made a little rustling sound with their tail. They were not rattlesnakes, but they made this little rustling sound. And then I got looking around me, and man, all the way around me was snakes, you know. I remember bailing out of there real fast and getting away from them. But of course, Dad told me when I got down to the house that don't worry about them. They're non-poisonous, you know. But yeah, there's a lot lot of things I remember like that, you know. Of course, I was right at the age where I was outside all the time. Jerry and I was never in the house. We were outside all the time. I remember up at the top of the hill where after this grader man had made the road to the top of the hill, there was a pretty good bank right there of just the old clay soil, that because we were right in the heart of the Loess Hills right there, and this old clay bank. And I remember Jerry and I found 2 old rusty worn out butcher knives. I think they'd been there before we ever moved there, you know, from the people who lived before us. And so we would go up there, and just to show you how times have changed, we entertained ourselves by digging caves with those butcher knives. We would slice the dirt, and then we'd paw it down with our hands and pull it out the way, and then slice some more dirt, and we would work at that for by the hour, long time, you know. And our goal was that we were going to come in and meet each other back in underneath the dirt, so we could finish our tunnel and go all the way through. And we did that. We got it done. But thank the Lord that the dirt never caved in on us, because they probably wouldn't have known where in the heck we were, you know. I don't know. They probably would, but it'd have been quite a chore for them to find us if it had fell in. But I wouldn't do something like that for all the tea in China. Not now. No way. But I don't know. It was just, that was the bulk of where most of my memories really were, was over there, without a doubt. Yeah, it was a good time. I remember, one of the things I remember too is that there was no grass. The thing I really remember about that place was dirt. Just nothing but dirt everywhere. You know, there wasn't any grass. If there was anything green, it was probably weeds, you know, because we didn't have any grass. And we had a little fence. Dad took some of it out on the south side, but it used to run close to the south side of the house and went up just in front of the cottonwood tree. Cottonwood tree's on the outside of it. And then it went up, and then it turned up the hill a little ways. And then it came back down and towards the house. And there was at one time there was a little old gate there, metal gate. And so you had to kind of go through that to go on out to where the cellar sat if you wanted to get something out of the cellar. And that was another place where you'd liable to see snakes, because whenever you open them cellar doors, that cellar was made out of these old tile that are hollow, you know. I remember, like I say, I remember vividly a snake hanging right out of one of them holes on one of those tiles. I went down there, and there he was, you know. And I wasn't really crazy about snakes then, and probably still not to this day. But there's just all kinds of memories like that. I mean, oh, another thing was too, is that old Duke dog that I had he was quite the dog. I loved that dog. It was one of the first dogs that I could truly really remember real well. And I remember he was a fighting fool. I used to take him with me when I drove the tractor over to get the mail. And our neighbor on the corner had a German Shepherd, and he was mean. He was, and I didn't like him anyway. So when I get over there, I remember 2 different times at least, I sicked old Duke on him. I said, "Sick him, Duke," and we had a battle going on, you know, right there in the road ditch, and they were really going at each other. And but Duke was wicked. That dog had been run over. That's another bad habit that he kind of had. He would bark at the front tires of the tractor. And every once in a while, we ran over him, right head and all, you know. Didn't kill him. He'd go running off. You know, he was hurt. He'd get down into the cellar and lay there till he got healed up, and then pretty soon he come back out. So he had bumps and lumps all over him. In fact, he died with a cancer growth on him because he was just all beat up, you know. But I never forget, he was quite the dog. And I remember my Uncle Lee, when he finally had to destroy him because he was just so bad it was pathetic. Took him down along the ditch and done away with him and kicked a little bit of dirt over the top of him. But there was, you know, a lot of memories, a lot of good memories over there. Oh, another time what happened once was Aunt Norma, my sister Norma, was staying with us because Dad and Lee had went to Canada fishing. Dad went with him, and they were up there, and she was staying with us. And I remember I went over west, kind of towards Murray Hill, and a guy by the name of it doesn't matter, but anyhow, I was working for him, and I was down in there way south, down in one of them long draws that's over there, and I was raking hay for him with a little old Ford tractor and a hay rake, you know, dump rake. But anyhow, it might have been a regular side delivery rake at that time. I think it was. But anyhow, I remember a huge black cloud come up over in the west, and I remember seeing him coming down in there to pick me up. He says, "We got to get out of here. I'm taking you home real quick," because you could tell the old clouds were black and they were really heading towards us. Well, we got back over to the farm, and he had just barely got up out of there and got gone when it cut loose a cloudburst. I mean a doozy of a cloudburst. Hard rain, you know. And I remember we had Dad had a man come and build a division ditch over in the pasture. And it wasn't very old. It hadn't been there very long. And I'll never forget it because we all stood looking out that south window while it was raining, and that division, or that ditch over there, washed out. The water boiled right through it and just washed out a huge big place, you know, and the water come down. And I'll never forget that because Norma was all upset. She'd never been anything quite like that. She'd been in rains and stuff, but nothing quite like that one, you know. And a tree limb, the wind blew out of the west real hard, and I remember one tree limb coming off the cottonwood tree that blew through the west window of the kitchen, right by the kitchen window, and we had to go out and pull that free and stuff. And oh yeah, a lot of good memories. We had good times there. I remember, like my sister Shirley said about sleeping upstairs. She had a room, as you got to the top of the stairs was her room, and there was a railing there, and then you walked along that railing and come through a doorway into the south bedroom, and there was 2 windows in that room, one to the east and one to the south. And I remember Jerry and we were in one bed, and when Dwayne and Lauren were home, they slept in the other bed, you know, the other double bed. And boy, I can remember many times when I'd wake up in the wintertime especially, and there was snow on my pillow because the windows were not very tight, and it would blow that powder snow in, you know, and there'd be snow on my pillow. I remember that. But we never seemed to be cold because we had these big old feather beds back then, and you snuggled right down in them, and if you had several good blankets to pull over the top of you, man, you could be pretty warm really while you're in bed, at least, you know. And so, yeah, it was good times. Trying to think of some other deals. Oh, I remember one time we had a horse. Well, we had a horse named Prince, and then before we got this other horse named Babe, Dad had a kind of a white-colored horse. I don't remember what the name of it was, but the only thing I remember is after a real bad lightning storm at one time, Dad says, well, why don't you go out and check on the horses, you know, something to do. And they were up, there was a cornfield right west of that was about the best land piece of ground we had. That was always in the corn. And then there was a fence line up a little bit. It went east and west a little ways up. And then above that was an alfalfa field, you know. And these horses were running out in that alfalfa. And so I went up there, and I'll never forget it because I looked down the fence line about so far, and there laid that white horse. His head was kind of uphill, but the lightning, he had his neck over the fence, and the lightning hit the fence, and it killed him, you know, outright. And that's another little experience I can remember being over there. And I remember more things that happened outside than ever happened in the house, because I was outside pretty near all the time. You know, I don't remember being in the house much. And except with one exception that I can remember was one, I don't remember for sure, I think it was Thanksgiving time. And I do remember that because Mom always had to use the living room table, and sometimes she had to slide another small table up to it in order to accommodate everybody around the table, you know. And I remember Norman and Lee were home that time, and I believe Nolan and Leo were there. And of course it was Dad and Mom and me and Jerry, and I don't believe Lauren was there at that particular time, but there was Shirley, of course, and Jerry and I, but there was, and of course Marva and Sandra were there, because Nola they were about our age. Marva was a year and a half older than I was, and but anyhow, I never forget that, because that was the first time that I really appreciated family. We were all around that big table, laughing and eating really good food. Mom was a fantastic cook, and of course I remember that we had a turkey, and we had potatoes and gravy and everything else, stuffing and everything that went with it, you know. And that was one time of an indoor experience that I can really remember, you know. And yeah, I remember one time Dad was always, like Shirley said, he was always up early and stoked up the stove in there. But I remember there wasn't no covering behind the stove, it was just wallpaper. And I can remember several mornings when he got the stove going pretty hot, cherry red hot as a matter of fact, and they got the wallpaper on fire. Because he was down there with an old cotton glove on his hand, and he was beating fire out, you know, on the wall. That's kind of what woke us up, you know. And went down there, and sure enough, the wallpaper. It was not the first time it got burnt, but it was several times. But he was down there beating it out. And it seems to me like Mom said, well, Dean, we got to do something about that. So he went and got one of them big metal, they're kind of an asphalt deal, they were covered with metal. And he put that up against the wall, and that stopped that, because it wouldn't let it get hot enough to get on fire. But just a lot of things like that. I can remember, I don't know whether you want to hear some of this, but I remember an experience with Shirley and Jerry and I don't think she told you, but I thought of it because I was right there, witnessed the whole thing. Anyway, Shirley, Mom and Dad were gone somewhere. I don't know where they had went. But Shirley was there, and she always had the job of really babysitting Jerry and I. That was her job, you know. Well, anyhow, she was trying to get Jerry to do something, and he wouldn't do it. Because he of all of us, he might have been about the most bullheaded of the whole batch. But anyhow, I remember she tried to get him to do something, wouldn't do it, and they got into a tussle. And Jerry got mad like he almost always did, and he shoved Shirley clear through the south window by the kitchen sink, right through the glass and all, right out onto the porch floor. Well, needless to say, Shirley didn't get cut or anything, but it made her furious. And she come charging back in there, and she was going to give Jerry a working door. Well, Jerry went out the back in the north porch door, and took off for the ditch. And she went out there, and I'll never forget it. They was chasing each other like a rooster chasing a hen, right down into the bottom of the ditch. Well, I went down past the windmill because Dad had made he had dug off the banks so that the cattle could get in from the south pasture, you know, going back across that washout ditch, you know. Well, I'll never forget it because I ran over to the edge of the bank, and you know how you've seen rabbits move in the grass and then they stop? Well, that's the way it looked with Jerry. He was charging along ahead of her, and he bailed off to one side in the weeds, in the hemp weeds and there, whatever there. And Shirley, she was screaming and bawling, and she went right on by him, went on clear to the south end of the ditch, pretty near it. And Jerry was hid all the time there, you know. Well, that was, later on this was funny, but at that time, it was nothing funny about it, because the window, she could have got hurt, and the window was busted. And the thing about it, I can remember too, though, is when Dad got home, instead of working over Jerry, he didn't seem to lay a finger on him, you know. And he was, I don't know, sometimes I really believe that Dad had a lot of respect for Jerry, because he'd seen him throw a lot of fits, you know. Like the time I, this is something else that's kind of funny too, because down in the bottom of that ditch, with these hemp weeds in the wintertime, when they died, they got to be about 7 foot long or so, and they were straight as a string, and then when you pulled them out, you had a point on the end of them about 4 or 5 inches long, and it was hard. It was the root part, and it was really hard, you know. But those things have made the neatest spears. I mean, you could toss them, and they would really, you could throw them pretty accurate, you know. Well, I remember one time Jerry and I had made a couple of them, and there was nothing, we weren't trying to hurt each other, you know, but I remember I was standing down by the back porch, and Jerry was up on the top of the cellar, and I threw it, and I caught him right up here in the temple. And the blood, it must have been an artery, because the blood was really jumping, you know. Well, when he put his hand up there, and he was all right till he seen the blood, then he went absolutely berserk. I mean, he come down off that hill, and I knew it was time to go, because I had a lot of respect for my little brother too, I can tell you that. And I ran inside the house, and he come in there, and he was bleeding and bawling, screaming. And Mom, if she hadn't have been there, I think he'd, I don't know what he'd done. He'd really worked me over. I know he would have, because we got into a tussle kind of, and pretty near busted one of the kitchen cabinet doors, you know. And anyway, we finally got that all solved, but I didn't intend to hit. I didn't even think I'd come close to him, but I tossed that thing, and it hit him right in the temple, you know, and the blood just gushed. And no, I tell you that I could think of a lot more, but I don't know how much further you want me to go than that. But
I'm here at the old 80 with my Uncle Ronnie. Ronnie's most of his memories with Charles, Dean, and Anna were here. So Ronnie, tell me where that house used to sit and the road that led up to it and everything.
Well, the road used to go, you could go either way. You went down around that way. House set down about right in there. There used to be a chicken house that set over about in here. And then about halfway down from there was a cellar between there and the house. And there used to be 1, 2, 3 great big cottonwood trees that set
And down there in that bottom there?
Down there in the bottom on beside the house, not very far from the house. And then the barn set back out here. And there was a corn crib that set south of the barn down in the feed lot. And then there was another corn crib that used to set behind the barn. And this, all that out in there was part of the land, the best piece of land that Dad had to farm was right there. It was probably maybe 20 or 25 acres involved in that. And then he farmed some of the side hill and back up around the hollow. Used to be, most of the time, he kept that into an alfalfa field back up in there. And I remember that whole hillside where all those trees are was nothing but pasture ground.
So those trees weren't there?
None of those trees were there.
Not a one?
Not one tree.
Wow.
It was all pasture ground. And then the fence line, you could see the fence line where it still goes east and west.
Yep.
That went on up, went up to a corner up on the top of the hill and met up with Cruss's land, our neighbors over the hill. Back north and went right down in that hollow and went on up into that other hollow on north of the north fence line up made up on top of the ridge.
I know Dad's got a famous picture when he came back from the Navy, or maybe before he left or something, where he's got Uncle Jerry up, lifting him up with one arm above his head.
Yeah, we did all kinds of stuff out there. We had a little yard right east of the house that was partially fenced in. Came around on kind of 3 sides. And I know we spent a lot of time playing kick the can. Used to be a yard light down here between the house and the barn by the tool shed, we called it. And Dad kept a little bit of sack. Sometimes he kept some sack feed in there. And we used to pour some of the ground oats that we had in there out, put it out into the slop barrel, and slopped it up.
Is that old road that runs up that, was that part of there, or was that just something?
No, that was never there. Yeah. That was never there.
It was hard to imagine.
You can't tell it now, but there used to be a great big, huge, dry gulch ditch went down through here. Nothing. It didn't have no spring water in it. It was just rainwater wash.
Yeah.
And I remember Dad, in order to get the cows to the pasture on the other side, he had to take shovels and go on both sides of the bank and kind of slough the dirt down enough to where the cattle could cross the ditch and go up the other side and go out into the pasture. And yeah, there's a lot of good memories here.
It's hard for me to imagine all the buildings that were here that you just described, Uncle Ronnie. I mean, I bet it was a heck of a farm to see.
Well, it was
back in the day.
We thought it was a heck of a farm. Let's put it that way.
It was a nice little hollow.
And it was we always felt like we lived out in the country out here because we felt like we were by ourselves, you know. And pretty much we were. Some of the best memories that I have, anyhow. So, very good. That's all I can say about it.
Okay.
We used to, after the house, I guess they made this other road. They went around the house and then they came right back up between the barn and the house and the tool shed. They brought another road back up around behind
Make
here.
a big loop.
Made a teardrop loop and get out of here. And then down in here on the other side of the road here, inside that there used to be mulberry trees and some other like box elder trees where Dad had used to have some gas barrels that sat out there by those box elder trees.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite the
Quite the
place.
Yep, quite it was.